They sold you a dream, a glittering, diamond-encrusted lie, projected onto the silver screen at 24 frames per second. You look at the golden age of Hollywood, and you see elegance. You see velvet ropes, immaculate tuxedos, starlets with perfect porcelain smiles. But behind the heavy iron gates of the major studios, the air didn't smell like Chanel. It smelled like copper, panic, and hush money. The studio system was not a factory of dreams. It was the most efficient, glamorous, and heavily fortified crime syndicate in American history. When a box office god committed a sin, they didn't call the police. The police worked for them. You are about to see the monsters hiding behind the makeup, and I promise you, you will never look at a classic movie the same way again. The king could do no wrong. That was the unspoken, ironclad law at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Clark Gable was the undisputed monarch of the box office. He was a man whose crooked, charming smile generated millions of dollars to keep a desperate, Depression-era America distracted. But kings are reckless. Kings believe they are immortal. On a pitch-black night in 1933, a heavy, speeding car tore through the winding, treacherous streets of Hollywood. It didn't slow down. It slammed into a pedestrian with a sickening thud. The man was dead before his skull even hit the pavement. Behind the wheel, reeking of expensive bootleg whiskey and sudden, suffocating panic, was the king of Hollywood himself, Clark Gable. But Gable could not go to prison. The studio would lose its greatest, most lucrative asset. Enter Eddie Mannix, MGM's terrifying, ruthless executive fixer. Mannix didn't see a tragedy. He saw a math problem. Before the local police could even draw a chalk outline around the shattered body, the entire narrative was completely rewritten. A minor studio executive, a man who desperately needed money, was suddenly sitting in a police station, under a blinding light. He was confessing to a vehicular manslaughter he did not commit. He took the fall. The studio paid him a fortune under the table. The dead man was quietly buried, his family bought off, his memory erased. Gable returned to the set the very next morning. He put on his makeup, he looked into the camera, and he delivered his lines with that exact same trademark charm. He had literally gotten away with murder. The only cost was a hidden line item in an MGM accounting book. But Gable's destructive, untouchable path did not end with shattered windshields and buried bodies. It bled directly into the lives of those forced to share his blinding spotlight. Loretta Young was the ultimate, shining symbol of Catholic purity in Hollywood. A literal saint in a city built by sinners. But purity in Hollywood is just another costume. It's a wardrobe choice. During the freezing, isolated location shoot of the film Call of the Wild, the married Clark Gable forced his way into Young's private train compartment. The result of that claustrophobic night was a pregnancy that threatened to instantly destroy a carefully constructed empire of morality. In the Golden Age, abortion was a deadly, illegal scandal. Having a child out of wedlock was a guaranteed career execution. So, the studio architects gathered in a smoke-filled room and designed the most bizarre, psychologically twisted cover-up in the history of the silver screen. Loretta Young vanished from the face of the earth. She disappeared to a secret, heavily guarded location to give birth in absolute, terrifying hiding. The baby, a little girl, was immediately ripped away and handed over to a Catholic orphanage. Months later, Young orchestrated a highly publicized, sickeningly staged media circus. Flashbulbs popped as she announced to the world that she, the benevolent saint, was adopting an orphaned child, her own biological daughter. For the rest of her life, Loretta Young lived a schizophrenic reality. She played the charitable mother to the adoring cameras. But behind closed doors, her daughter grew up in a house built on a monstrous, suffocating lie. The girl was forced to wear large ears in public to hide her resemblance to Gable. She grew up never knowing that the handsome man on the massive movie posters was her father. The saint wore a flawless mask, and the brutal truth was buried alive in plain sight. Yet, while Young hid her deep sins behind a veil of strict morality, others hid theirs behind pure, untouchable comedic genius. Nobody made the world laugh quite like Charlie Chaplin, the little tramp, the beloved, bumbling underdog with the cane and the bowler hat. But behind the floppy shoes and the iconic mustache was a calculating predator who viewed the laws of men as nothing more than mild inconveniences. Chaplin's dark appetite for incredibly young girls was an open, rotting secret in the exclusive hills of Hollywood. He wielded his immense fame and unimaginable wealth like a weapon. He isolated teenage girls, promising them the stars, and then plunged them into psychological nightmares. When a terrified 16-year-old named Mildred Harris announced she was pregnant, the beloved genius didn't act out of love. He acted out of sheer, unadulterated terror of the federal government. To avoid being charged with statutory rape and violating the Mann Act, Chaplin orchestrated a quick, forced, unglamorous wedding. He didn't see a beautiful bride standing at the altar. He saw a legal shield against a devastating prison sentence. The marriage was a living hell. It was a cage of cruelty, intense control, and paranoia, ending in a bitter, explosive divorce, the exact moment the legal heat finally cooled down. Chaplin just kept smiling. The naive audiences kept laughing. The darkness remained entirely out of frame. But even Chaplin's predatory shadows pale in comparison to the dashing swashbuckler who played both sides of a global war. Errol Flynn was the quintessential, fearless action hero. He swung from crystal chandeliers, kissed the breathless leading lady, and defeated the villains with a blinding flash of steel. But off-screen, Flynn was a walking, breathing nightmare of moral decay. He was publicly put on trial for statutory crimes against teenage girls. The courtroom didn't look like a place of justice. It turned into a grotesque fan convention. The jury was completely, hopelessly blinded by his blinding star power. Teenage girls waited outside the courthouse, screaming his name as if he were arriving at a movie premiere. He was acquitted. He walked out to the cheers of the very public he secretly despised. But that trial was just the tip of a terrifying iceberg. Buried deep within classified, heavily redacted FBI files was a far more dangerous reality. Errol Flynn, the beloved hero of the patriotic American screen, harbored deep, sickening sympathies for the Nazi regime. He actively befriended high-ranking Gestapo agents before the war broke out. He moved flawlessly through the elite, champagne-soaked circles of Hollywood gathering whispers. He was a golden god, acting as a willing informant for the most evil machine in modern history. The studio system knew, and they buried the federal investigations. A Nazi sympathizer could not be the top box office draw. They shielded a potential traitor because the box office receipts were simply too astronomical to sacrifice. The studio protected their flawless assets, even if it meant harboring literal monsters. But what happens when the monster loses his mind? What happens when a star kills with his bare hands, and the blood is too thick to wash away? Paul Kelly was a tough guy on screen, a man's man. He threw punches that looked devastatingly real because the anger behind his eyes was completely authentic. In 1927, that violent, carefully cultivated persona broke through the celluloid barrier and entered the real world with devastating consequences. Kelly discovered that his lover, an actress, was being verbally and physically mistreated by another actor named Ray Raymond. Kelly didn't call the police. He didn't issue a warning. He walked directly to Raymond's house, fueled by blinding rage and pure adrenaline. He didn't bring a weapon. He didn't need one. He beat the man with his bare fists until Raymond was an unrecognizable, broken, bloody mess on the living room floor. The sound of bone crushing against bone echoed through the quiet Hollywood neighborhood. Raymond died days later in agonizing pain from catastrophic head trauma. It was a brutal, intimate, savage murder. Kelly went to prison, and for a moment it seemed justice would be served. But this is Hollywood. The rules of human reality simply do not apply. He served a pathetic, insulting fraction of his sentence. When the killer finally walked out of the heavy prison gates, his career wasn't over. It was actually revitalized. The major studios didn't shun him. They welcomed the murderer back with open arms and lucrative contracts. They used his real-world violence to market his upcoming movies. Audiences happily paid their hard-earned dimes to see the man who had actually taken a human life. The industry didn't just forgive a brutal murderer. They weaponized him. They monetized him. They turned his victim's spilled blood into pure, unadulterated gold. John Huston directed sprawling cinematic masterpieces. He was a titan of the industry, a towering man who controlled every single frame of his legendary films with the iron, unforgiving will of a dictator. And he deeply believed that his absolute power extended to the asphalt. Driving recklessly through the steep, treacherous Hollywood hills, Huston lost control of his heavy vehicle. The massive steel machine crushed a young woman walking on the side of the road, snapping her life away in a violent instant. In the real world, this is called vehicular manslaughter. In Hollywood, it was merely viewed as an unfortunate scheduling conflict. The studio executives and their shadowy fixers arrived at the scene before the local police had even finished taking their preliminary notes. Envelopes of thick cash changed hands in dark, smoky rooms. The narrative was meticulously, surgically crafted. They shifted the blame entirely. They altered the physics of the crash in the public eye. They painted the victim as careless. Huston didn't spend a single night freezing in a jail cell. He didn't even miss a day of work. He went right back to the canvas director's chair, shouting action through a megaphone, while a broken family buried their daughter in a quiet cemetery. The system taught these golden gods that they were completely immortal. It taught them that consequences, grief, and prison were concepts reserved strictly for the poor. Lana Turner fully understood the terrifying power of a good performance. The blonde bombshell was the absolute, undeniable pinnacle of Hollywood glamour. She dripped in diamonds and dangerous allure. But her taste in men was a fatal, unavoidable flaw. She became hopelessly entangled with Johnny Stompanato. He wasn't an actor. He was a vicious, violently jealous mob enforcer with a hair-trigger temper and deep ties to the Los Angeles underworld. Their high-profile relationship was a psychological thriller played out in lavish, gated mansions. It was a toxic, inescapable spiral of physical abuse, blackmail, and obsessive jealousy. And it finally ended on a quiet Friday night. It ended in a massive pool of dark blood on a pristine pink bedroom carpet. A kitchen knife plunged deep into his abdomen. But Lana Turner, the glamorous starlet, didn't hold the bloody knife. Her 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl, did, or so the story goes. What followed was the most spectacular, perfectly directed, and heavily rehearsed legal theater in American history. Lana Turner took the witness stand. She wore a modest, perfectly tailored suit. She wept. She visibly trembled. She delivered a gripping monologue of such devastating maternal agony that the hardened jury was completely, helplessly hypnotized. The violent death was quickly ruled justifiable homicide, a young girl protecting her battered mother. But the dark whispers in Hollywood never stopped. The dark, gnawing, inescapable theory that Lana herself struck the fatal blow in a fit of rage, and then methodically coached her young, legally protected daughter to take the blame. It was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation, a mother sacrificing her child's psychological sanity to save her own silver screen crown. It was the ultimate, cynical Hollywood ending. But not all endings were written so elegantly. Some were pure, unadulterated horror. Spade Cooley was the undisputed king of Western swing, a television pioneer with a massive, devoted following, and a warm smile that charmed millions of viewers every single week. Behind the closed, heavy doors of his sprawling ranch, he was a sadistic, uncontrollable butcher. His dark paranoia regarding his wife, Ella May, reached a terrifying fever pitch of psychotic delusion. He became convinced she was unfaithful. In a chilling, drawn-out display of absolute power and complete madness, Cooley did not just kill his wife. He tortured her. He beat her relentlessly, mercilessly, for hours inside their lavish home. He crushed her skull. He burned her with cigarettes. And in a detail so horrifying it completely defies belief, he forced their teenage daughter to sit in a chair and watch the entire agonizing, bloody process. He believed his celebrity status made him utterly untouchable. He believed he was the judge, jury, and executioner. Cooley was eventually convicted. It was a rare, shocking moment where the impenetrable Hollywood shield finally failed to protect one of its own. But the deep psychological scar left on his young daughter, the sheer, paralyzing terror of that night, remains one of the darkest, most depraved secrets ever to leak from the golden era. A reminder that sometimes the smiling man playing the fiddle is actually the devil himself. Bing Crosby was the soothing voice of Christmas, the calm, pipe-smoking, sweater-wearing patriarch of the ultimate American dream. His velvety voice brought immense comfort to millions of living rooms during the darkest, most terrifying days of the 20th century. But inside the heavily guarded Crosby mansion, there was absolutely no comfort to be found. There was only a chilling, systematic, and unrelenting campaign of psychological and physical terror. Crosby ruled his terrified children with a heavy, bruised, and unforgiving hand. He demanded absolute, military-like perfection. He enforced a draconian discipline that slowly, methodically shattered the fragile minds of his young sons. The studio PR machine worked overtime, desperately painting portraits of the perfect, happy celebrity family. They planted fake stories in magazines of idyllic fishing vacations and loving, warm holidays around the fireplace. Meanwhile, behind the blinding flashbulbs, the damage was rotting his family from the inside out. Two of his sons would eventually take their own lives. They put guns to their heads, completely broken by the invisible, suffocating weight of their father's hidden cruelty. The oblivious public bought the hit records. They bought the movie tickets. They unknowingly funded a literal house of horrors, completely distracted by a beautiful, velvet bow. It all started with the man who accidentally built the system of silence. Fatty Arbuckle, the most famous, highly paid comedian on earth. In room 11219 of the luxurious St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco, a wild, bootleg-fueled, multi-day party ended in utter catastrophe. A young, aspiring actress named Virginia Rappa was found screaming in agony, her bladder violently ruptured. She died days later. The details leaked to the press were grotesque. They involved allegations of immense, crushing physical weight, violent sexual assault, and a piece of hotel ice used in a horrific manner. Arbuckle was dragged through the mud. He was subjected to 3 agonizing, highly publicized trials that captured the morbid fascination of the entire globe. He was ultimately acquitted by a jury. But the damage to the illusion of Hollywood was completely irreversible. The public demanded blood. They demanded censorship. The desperate studio heads realized that if they didn't immediately learn to control the narrative, to hide the bodies, and silence the victims, the entire multi-million-dollar industry would burn to the ground. The Arbuckle scandal forced the creation of the draconian Hollywood morality clauses. It literally gave birth to the fixers. Virginia Rappy's horrific, painful death was the bloody foundation upon which the entire Hollywood cover-up machine was meticulously built. Her restless ghost haunts every single buried scandal, every payoff, and every lie that followed in the decades to come. Which brings us to the final, fatal break of the Hollywood psyche. Gig Young won an Academy Award. He had the undeniable charm, the devastating looks, and the ultimate, golden validation of his peers. He had everything a man could possibly dream of. But the golden statue sitting on his mantle could not stop the demons screaming inside his head. Young was a man entirely consumed by rampant alcoholism, deeply buried insecurities, and a sprawling darkness that no amount of roaring applause could ever silence. He bounced from failed marriage to failed marriage, a hollow shell of a man pretending to be a star. In 1978, the glamorous facade completely dissolved into terrifying, irreversible madness. Inside a luxurious, quiet New York apartment, the smiling Oscar winner took a gun and shot his young, newlywed bride to death. She didn't stand a chance. Then, amidst the deafening echo of the gunshot, he turned the weapon on himself and pulled the trigger. It was a bizarre, completely incomprehensible end to a glittering, envied career. A brutal murder-suicide that left no suicide note, no final explanation, only a chilling, metallic silence. It was the ultimate, undeniable proof that the mask of celebrity is incredibly fragile, and the rot beneath it is absolute, consuming, and deadly. We look back at the golden age of Hollywood, and we mourn the loss of elegance. We mourn the loss of a time when stars were larger than life, when men wore hats and women wore silk. But we are mourning a carefully constructed mirage. The acting talent was real, but the morality was a complete, cynical fabrication. The immense fame didn't drive these cinematic icons mad. It simply handed them the keys to a kingdom where their darkest, most violent impulses carried zero consequences. They were shielded by a ruthless industry that valued the profitable illusion over human life. The blood dried on the floorboards. The reels were changed by the projectionist. The audience clapped in the dark, and the silver screen faded to black. You have to ask yourself, as you watch the flawless faces of today's cinema staring back at you, who is cleaning up the blood right now?